You keep praying, and nothing is happening. Not completely nothing, just enough to keep you hoping. A conversation that feels right. A connection that seems natural. Moments where it feels like this might actually be different. But then, something shifts. They pull back. They stop showing up the same way. And suddenly you're the one putting in more effort. Again. And now you're stuck in this question. Should you keep praying for this? Or should you let it go? Because this isn't new for you. You've seen this pattern before. Different person, same feeling. It starts easily. Feels right. You don't have to force anything. And that's exactly what makes you believe. This time, it might actually work, but then it doesn't. And what confuses you the most isn't even the relationship. It's God. Because you know what it feels like when He answers you. You're not someone who's guessing or hoping blindly. You've experienced clarity before. You've felt direction. But when it comes to this part of your life, nothing. No clear answer. No sense of direction. No feeling of yes or no. Just silence. And that silence is what makes everything heavier. Because now you're not just questioning the situation. You're questioning what God is doing. Or if He's doing anything at all. So you keep going back and forth in your mind. Maybe I should just trust the process. Maybe this is a test. Maybe I need to be more patient. But then another thought creeps in. If this was right, why does it feel so unclear? And now you're stuck between two fears. Letting go of something that could have been right, or holding on to something that never really was. And here's the part you haven't considered yet. What if God isn't silent because He's ignoring you? What if He's silent because you're asking the wrong question? Because this isn't just about one situation. This has been happening over and over again. Starts the same way every time. You meet someone and it just flows. No pressure. No confusion at the start. No chasing. Feels natural. And that's exactly what pulls you in. Because after everything you've been through, you're not looking for something forced. You're looking for something that feels right. And when it finally does, you don't just notice it. You hold on to it. You start thinking, okay, maybe this is the one that's different. But then slowly, something changes. Not all at once. Just small things. They take longer to reply. They stop initiating. The energy shifts. And at first, you ignore it. Because you don't want to overthink. You tell yourself, they're just busy. It's not that deep. I shouldn't ruin this by overreacting. But deep down, you feel it. That quiet shift. That subtle distance. And now you're in that space again. Where nothing is clearly wrong. But nothing feels right either. So you start adjusting. You text first. You keep the conversation going. You try to maintain what was there. Not in a desperate way. Just enough to not let it fade. But slowly, you realize something. If you don't reach out, nothing happens. And that's where it starts to hurt differently. Because now it's not just confusion. It's an imbalance. You're showing up, but they're only responding. And that creates this constant tension inside you. Because part of you still believes, they like me, I can feel it. But another part of you sees the reality. If they really wanted this, would it feel this one-sided? And that's where your mind starts looping. Why does this keep happening to me? Wasn't this one different? Why is God quiet about this? Because that's the part that doesn't make sense. You've prayed about it. You've asked for clarity. And usually you get it. But here, nothing. No sign to hold on. No sign to walk away. Just space. And in that space, your thoughts get louder. Maybe you just need to be more patient. Maybe God is still working on it. Maybe this is something you're supposed to fight for. But then another thought hits you, quietly, but clearly. Or maybe, this just isn't meant for me. And you don't want to accept that. Because this time felt different. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel random. It felt like something that happened naturally. And that's why letting go feels wrong. But staying doesn't feel right either. So now you're stuck in between, holding on to something that isn't growing and praying for something that isn't clear. And without realizing it, you start forming a belief that goes deeper than this situation. Maybe God just isn't answering me about this. But what if that belief is wrong? What if God isn't avoiding you? What if you're misreading what's happening? Because right now, you're looking at this like it's about the relationship, about whether this person is right for you, whether you should keep praying, whether you should keep holding on. But what if that's not the real issue? What if the problem isn't the person, and it's not even the situation? You've been telling yourself, if I keep praying, God will eventually make this work. That sounds right, feels right, but look at what that belief assumes. It assumes that if something feels natural, if it starts easily, if you're emotionally connected, then it must be meant to work. And if it's not working yet, then you just need to wait longer, pray harder, hold on a little more. But what if that's exactly what's keeping you stuck? Because every time something begins like this, you don't just experience it, you attach to it. Not just to the moment, but to what it could become. And that changes how you see everything that comes after. Because now you're not just asking, what is happening here? You're asking, how do I make this work? And that's a completely different mindset. So when the other person pulls back, you don't step back and observe. You lean in. You try to understand it, fix it, maintain it. Because in your mind, this isn't just a connection anymore. It's something that should work. And that's where the tension begins. Because reality is showing you one thing, but your expectation is telling you something else. And instead of questioning the expectation, you question the situation. Or worse, you question God. You think, why isn't he helping me with this? But what if he is? Just not in the way you expected. Because there's something you're not seeing yet. Something underneath all of this that keeps repeating. And until you see that, it won't matter who comes into your life. The pattern will stay the same. Here's what's actually happening underneath all of this. You're not just experiencing connection, you're assigning meaning to it. The moment something feels easy, when conversation flows, when you have things in common, when it feels natural, you don't just see it as a moment. You see it as a signal, a sign that this could be something real, something stable, something that finally works. And without realizing it, you move ahead of reality. You start building something in your mind that hasn't been built in real life yet. Not intentionally, it just happens. Because you've been waiting for this feeling. So when it shows up, you hold on to it. You start filling in the gaps. You imagine how it could grow. You assume consistency will follow. You expect the same energy to stay. And that's where the shift happens. Because now you're no longer responding to what's actually there. You're responding to what you believe is forming. And those are two completely different things. It's like having a conversation with someone who only replies when you speak first. But in your mind, you're treating it like a two-way connection. So you keep talking. You keep initiating. You keep giving it space to grow. Not because it is growing, but because you believe it will. And slowly, you start investing more than what's being given back. More attention, more emotional energy, more mental space, even though the reality in front of you isn't matching that level. And here's the part that's hard to admit. You're not just connecting with the person. You're connecting with what they represent to you. The possibility, the timing, the feeling that this might finally be it. And that creates emotional dependency. Not on them as they are, but on what you've attached to them. So when they pull back, it doesn't just feel like distance. It feels like something important is slipping away. And that's why you don't step back easily. Because stepping back doesn't just mean losing the person. It feels like losing what they could have been. And once you're in that position, you stop seeing clearly. Because now you're not evaluating reality anymore. You're protecting an idea. And that's why the pattern repeats. Different person, same attachment, different situation, same emotional investment, same outcome. Not because something is wrong with you, but because something is happening inside you that you haven't fully seen yet. And this is where everything starts to look different. Because up to now, you've been looking at this like God is part of the outcome. Like he's supposed to either make this work or clearly show you that it won't. So you pray, you ask for clarity, you ask for direction, you ask for a sign. And when nothing comes back, you interpret that as silence. But what if that's not what it is? What if nothing is actually being withheld from you? You're just focused on the wrong answer? Because think about how you're approaching this. You're asking, should I keep praying for this relationship? Is this person right for me? Is this meant to work? All of those questions are centered on one thing, the outcome. But scripture rarely works like that. When people ask for outcomes, God often responds with something deeper. Not because he's ignoring the request, but because the request isn't the real issue. You see this pattern again and again. People looking for direction about something external, while God is addressing something internal. Not to deny them, but to align them. And that's what's happening here. Because right now you're asking God to confirm something outside of you, while there's something inside you that hasn't been addressed yet. And until that's seen clearly, any answer about the relationship wouldn't actually help you. It would just keep the same pattern going. That's why the silence feels so specific. You've noticed it yourself. God answers you in other areas. You feel clarity. You recognize his direction. But here, nothing. That's not random. That's intentional. Because this isn't about getting an answer. It's about seeing something. Something you've been overlooking. Every time this pattern shows up, and once you see it, the question changes. You stop asking, is this the right person? And you start asking, what is this revealing in me? Because that's where the clarity actually comes from. Not from forcing an outcome, but from understanding what's happening underneath it. And this is the part most people miss. God's silence isn't rejection. It's not him ignoring you. It's not him withholding something good. It's redirection. Not away from something meant for you, but away from something you're attaching meaning to too quickly. And once that starts to become clear, you don't need the same kind of answer anymore, because you're not looking at the situation the same way. And once you see that, everything starts to connect, because now you're not just looking at one situation. You're seeing the pattern behind all of them. Every time something felt natural, every time it started easily, every time you thought, this might be different, you didn't just experience it. You moved ahead of it. You gave it meaning before it proved anything. And that's why it kept ending the same way. Not because every person was wrong, but because you were relating to them in the same way. From expectation, not observation. From projection, not reality. And this is the part that shifts everything. This was never really about whether the relationship would work. It was about what it was doing to you. It was showing you how quickly you attach, how much you invest before there's consistency, how easily you start building something before it exists. And once you see that, you can't unsee it, because now those small signs you ignored before start to stand out. The delayed replies, the lack of initiative, the imbalance. You don't explain them away anymore. You notice them, and instead of asking, how do I make this work? You start asking, what is actually happening here? And that changes your position completely, because now you're not trying to hold on to something, you're trying to understand it. And that brings clarity. Not the kind of clarity that tells you what to do immediately, but the kind that removes confusion. Because now the silence makes sense. You're not being ignored. You're being redirected. Not away from something meant for you, but away from a pattern that keeps pulling you into the same place. And once that clicks, the original question loses its power, because it was built on a misunderstanding. So now, the question changes. Not, should I keep praying for this? But, what is this showing me? Because if you stay in the first question, you stay stuck in the same cycle, waiting for an answer about something that was never the real issue. But when you shift the question, everything becomes clearer. You stop chasing clarity from outside, and you start recognizing it from within. You see the imbalance earlier. You feel the difference sooner. You don't have to wait until it breaks to understand it. And most importantly, you stop confusing potential with reality. Because now you're grounded in what's actually happening, not what you hope it could become. And that changes how you move. You don't attach as quickly. You don't invest before there's consistency. You don't try to hold something together. That isn't holding itself. Not because you're closed off, but because you're finally seeing clearly. And this is the part you need to understand. You're not someone who keeps getting unlucky. You're not someone who just hasn't found the right person yet. You're someone who has been moving through the same pattern without realizing it. And now you do. So whether this specific situation works or not is no longer the most important thing, because what matters is that you're not the same inside it anymore. You're not asking the same questions. You're not holding on the same way. You're not interpreting silence the same way. And that's where the real shift happens. Because once you see the pattern, you don't repeat it the same way again. So maybe the answer isn't, keep praying for this. And it's not, just let it go. Maybe the answer is something quieter than that. Something you don't hear, but eventually understand. Maybe God isn't silent. Maybe he already answered, just not in the way you were expecting.